I am 84. It took me this long to understand what happiness actually is. My name is Mei-Lin Tanaka. I was born in Kyoto, Japan, in a small house near a river that my grandmother said had been running since before anyone could remember. I came to this country at 26 with a medical degree, a suitcase, and the absolute certainty that I understood how life worked. I was a doctor. I had studied the body for years. I believed that if you understood the mechanics of a thing, you understood the thing itself. I was wrong about almost everything that mattered. I practiced medicine for 38 years, general practice, then palliative care, which means I spent the last 20 years of my career sitting with people at the end of their lives. I held more hands in those final hours than I can count. I watched people leave this world with terror on their faces, and I watched others leave it with something that looked unmistakably like relief, like arrival. And I spent years trying to understand what the difference was. What did the ones who left peacefully know that the others did not? It took me until I was past 70 to begin to understand, and it took me until 84 to be able to say it simply. This is what I have found. Not in books, though I have read many. Not in religion, though I have sat with many faiths. In the small, ordinary, overlooked moments of a life that I almost moved through without stopping to notice. The first thing I found, the world is full of magic, but you have to go looking for it. When I was 11 years old, my father gave me a magnifying glass for my birthday. It came in a small wooden box lined with velvet, and I remember the weight of it in my hand, heavier than I expected, solid, serious. I took it outside that afternoon and held it over a leaf that had fallen near the garden wall, and what I saw stopped me completely. The surface of that leaf was not flat. It was a landscape. There were ridges and valleys, tiny hairs standing upright along the veins, structures so intricate and deliberate that I could not understand how I had walked past leaves my entire life without knowing any of this was there. I sat in that garden for 2 hours, moving the glass from leaf to stone to bark to soil, and each time the world rearranged itself into something I had never seen before. That was the first time I understood that the world is not what it appears to be at ordinary scale. That underneath the surface of every ordinary thing is an extraordinary thing, waiting for someone to look closely enough to find it. I forgot this for most of my adult life. I was too busy. I was moving too fast. I was always on my way to the next thing, the next patient, the next appointment, the next obligation. The magnifying glass sat in a drawer somewhere, and I stopped looking closely at anything that was not a symptom or a problem to be solved. What I know now, at 84, is that the capacity for wonder is not something you either have or you do not have. It is something you practice. You choose it every day, the way you choose what to eat or whether to go outside. And the more you choose it, the more the world responds. I walk in my garden every morning now, and I find something I have never noticed before. The way the light moves through a spider's web. The particular sound a thrush makes just before rain. the way the soil smells different in different seasons. These are not small things. These are the whole thing. This is what life is made of, and most of us walk straight through it on our way to somewhere else. The second thing I found: nature does not think, it simply is, and that is the lesson. I grew up near that river in Kyoto, and water has always done something to me that nothing else quite does. Not the dramatic water, not waterfalls or storms. The quiet water, the kind that moves steadily and without urgency, finding its way around every obstacle without fighting it, without stopping to wonder if the obstacle is fair. When I was in my 50s, I was going through the hardest period of my professional life. I had lost 3 patients in the same month, not unusually for palliative care, but these 3 had been young, and the weight of it had accumulated into something I could not put down. I was not sleeping. I was not eating properly. I was doing what I had always done in difficulty, working harder, thinking more, trying to solve my way out of a feeling. My colleague and friend Haruki, a man 10 years older than me, who had been in palliative care his entire career, and who had the particular stillness of someone who has made peace with the uncontrollable, took me for a walk along the river one afternoon and said almost nothing for the first hour. We simply walked. And somewhere in that walking, something in me that had been clenched for weeks began, very slowly, to release. On the way back, he said, "The river does not grieve the water it has already carried." And then he said nothing else. I have thought about that sentence almost every day since. The river does not grieve the water it has already carried. It does not hold on to what has passed through it. It does not resist what is coming. It simply moves, steadily and without urgency, doing what it is made to do, finding its way around every obstacle without fighting it. I am not a river. I am a human being with a thinking mind that catalogs and worries and replays and anticipates. But I have learned, slowly and imperfectly, to spend a little more time in my body and a little less time in my head. To walk in nature not as exercise, but as practice. The practice of being present in a world that is not waiting for my approval or my understanding. The trees do not need me to comprehend them in order to stand. The birds do not need me to explain their songs in order to sing them. And in their company, something in me that is always reaching and striving and solving is allowed for a little. The third thing I found: imperfection is not the obstacle to peace, it is the path. I spent most of my life trying to be better. Not in the gentle, curious way, in the driven, dissatisfied way. I was never quite the doctor I wanted to be, never quite the mother I wanted to be, never quite the person I had imagined I would become by now. There was always a gap between who I was and who I believed I should be, and I lived in that gap for decades, using it as fuel, telling myself that the discomfort was productive. It was not productive. It was exhausting. And it kept me from seeing what was actually in front of me. I went to a meditation retreat in my late 60s, something I would have dismissed entirely in my 40s as impractical. And on the third day, the teacher, a small, quiet woman from Sri Lanka named Ananda, asked each of us to name our greatest source of inner conflict. When it came to my turn, I said, without hesitation, that my greatest source of conflict was that after 68 years of trying, I still reacted badly when I felt criticized. My husband, Kenji, a gentle man, a patient man, had a way of phrasing certain observations that landed in me like a stone in still water. And even after 40 years of marriage, I had not learned to receive them with grace. Ananda looked at me for a long moment and said, "You are human, yes? Humans react. This is not a failure. This is information." And then she said something I have never forgotten. The cracks in the bowl are not where the bowl is broken. They are where the light gets in. I had heard versions of that idea before, but something about the way she said it, simply, without drama, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world, reached me in a way it never had before. The imperfections are not the problem. They are the texture of a real life. They are the evidence of genuine engagement with the world. A life without cracks is a life that has not been fully used. I am still impatient sometimes. I still react when I should not. I still fall short of the person I would like to be in small ways that I notice and that used to shame me. But I have learned to hold these things differently, not as failures to be corrected, but as the honest record of a human being trying her best in a complicated world. And in that holding, something that used to feel like a wound has become, gradually, something that feels like grace. The fourth thing I found: the present moment is not a waiting room. It is the only room there is. In palliative care, you sit with people who have run out of future. And what I observed over 20 years was that the ones who suffered most in those final weeks and months were not always the ones in the most physical pain. They were the ones who had spent their lives somewhere other than where they were, always planning, always anticipating, always living in the next thing, and who now found themselves in a present moment they had never learned to inhabit. They would say things like, "I always thought there would be more time," or "I kept waiting for things to settle down before I really started living." And I would sit with them and hold their hands and feel, underneath my professional composure, a recognition that frightened me, because I was doing the same thing. I was always on my way somewhere, always managing the present in order to arrive at a future that kept receding. My patient, Mrs. Okonkwo, a Nigerian woman in her late 70s, a retired school teacher who had come to this country 40 years earlier and raised 5 children largely alone after her husband died young, taught me more about the present moment than any teacher I have ever had. She had been diagnosed with a terminal illness and given 6 months, and she spent those 6 months more fully alive than most people I have known in the best of health. She kept a small notebook by her bed. Not a journal. She was not a journal person, she told me with a smile. Just a list of things she had noticed that day. The color of the light through the hospital window at 4 in the afternoon. The sound of her daughter's laugh on the phone. the taste of the mango her son brought from the market. Small things, ordinary things, things that most people would not think to write down because they did not seem significant enough. "Dr. Tanaka," she said to me one afternoon, "I wasted so many years waiting for my life to get good enough to pay attention to. It was always good enough. I just did not know how to see it." She died on a Tuesday morning in March, with her children around her and a small smile on her face that I have thought about many times since. She had learned, in her final months, what it had taken me until my 80s to begin to understand. That the present moment is not the corridor between the things that matter. It is the thing that matters. It is the only thing there is. The fifth thing I found. Death is not the enemy of life. It is what makes life sacred. This is the one that took me the longest, and it is the one I most want to say clearly, because I think it is the one that causes the most unnecessary suffering. We are afraid of death, all of us, in different ways and to different degrees. We do not talk about it. We do not prepare for it. We treat it as a failure, a medical failure, a personal failure, a failure of will or faith or luck. And in treating it as a failure, we make it into a monster that stalks us through our lives, casting a shadow over everything we love. I have sat with death more times than I can count. I have watched it arrive in 100 different ways, and what I can tell you, from 38 years of medical practice and from the particular vantage point of 84 years of living, is that death is not the opposite of life. It is part of life. It is what gives life its weight and its beauty and its urgency. In nature, death is not hidden. It is everywhere, and it is not shameful. The fallen leaf feeds the soil that feeds the tree that makes the next leaf. The bird that dies in the garden becomes part of the garden. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is lost. It is simply transformed, continuously and without apology, into the next form of itself. I have learned to think about my own death the way I think about the river, not with resignation, not with fear, but with a kind of respectful curiosity. What is this thing? What does it ask of me? How do I live more fully in its presence rather than less? And what I have found is that when I stopped running from it, something extraordinary happened. The present moment became more vivid. The people I love became more precious. The ordinary Tuesday afternoon became something I could not afford to move through without noticing. Death, held honestly and without drama, does not diminish life. It illuminates it. The sixth thing I found. Happiness is not something you find. It is something you recognize. I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds. I know that happiness is not available to everyone in equal measure. I know that suffering is real, and that circumstances matter, and that I have been fortunate in ways that not everyone is fortunate. I am not standing here at 84 telling you that happiness is simply a choice, as though the people who are not happy have simply chosen incorrectly. That is not what I am saying. What I am saying is this. For most of my life, I was looking for happiness in the wrong direction. I was looking forward, toward the next achievement, the next resolution, the next version of my life that would finally be settled enough to enjoy. And happiness, I have learned, does not live in the forward direction. It lives in the present one. It lives in the cup of green tea on a cold morning, held with both hands. It lives in the particular quality of light in late afternoon, when the shadows grow long and the world turns golden for an hour before the dark comes. It lives in the sound of my granddaughter's voice on the telephone, talking about something that matters to her, and the feeling of being trusted with it. It lives in the garden after rain, when the earth smells like the beginning of everything. These are not consolation prizes. These are not the small pleasures you settle for when the big ones are out of reach. These are the thing itself. This is what happiness actually is. Not the dramatic version, not the version that announces itself with fanfare and demands to be photographed. The quiet version. The version that has been sitting in your ordinary life all along, waiting for you to stop moving long enough to notice it. I stopped looking for happiness at around 75. I stopped expecting it to arrive from somewhere outside myself, in some form I had not yet encountered. And in the stopping, I found it. Not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily and with increasing clarity, like the world coming into focus through a magnifying glass held over a leaf. And this is what it all comes down to. I have practiced medicine, raised children, buried a husband, lost friends, made mistakes I cannot undo, and done some things I am genuinely proud of. I have been afraid, and I have been brave, and I have been, for long stretches of time, simply ordinary. Going through the days without particular distinction, doing what needed to be done, getting through. And I am here to tell you that the ordinary days were the best ones. Not the days of achievement or recognition, the days when nothing happened except that I was present for them. The morning walks, the shared meals, the conversations that went on longer than they needed to because neither person wanted to be the one to end them. The secret to happiness, if there is a secret, and I am not sure there is, because secrets imply that something is hidden, and I do not think this is hidden so much as overlooked, is simply this: pay attention to the world around you, to the people in front of you, to the moment you are inside right now, which is the only moment you actually have. You do not need to travel to find wonder. You do not need to achieve anything more to deserve peace. You do not need to wait until your life is settled, or your problems are solved, or your circumstances are better. The wonder is here. The peace is here. The happiness is here, in the ordinary texture of a life being lived with full attention. I am 84 years old. I feel in many ways younger than I have ever felt. Not in my body, which is honest about its age, but in my curiosity, my capacity for surprise, my willingness to be moved by small things. I feel as though I have arrived somewhere, though I could not have told you at 30 or 40 or 50 that this was where I was going. It feels like the beginning, not the end. The beginning of knowing how to actually be here. Go live while there is still time. My name is Maylin Tanaka. I am 84 years old. The magnifying glass my father gave me is still on my desk. I still use it.